Welcome to episode 135 of 10 Minute Record Reviews. This time I'm going to talk about Black Sabbath's 1971 album, their third studio outing, Master of Reality. This was originally released on Vertigo Records in the UK, and what I have here is a 1973 pressing on Warner's, which is a Canadian release. Master of Reality is sometimes said to be the dividing line between fair-weather fans of Black Sabbath and people who are serious metalheads. But while it's true this is one of the heaviest albums ever recorded, I would argue it's still pretty accessible. It's got variety, it's got melody, it's got emotion, it's even got a little bit of wit. What it is not is an album you should listen to on your iPhone or on some kind of tinny stereo. You need a system that can actually produce a big bottom end, because this is an album, probably the album, which took rock to new sonic depths. This album comes out in the summer of 1971, and it catches Black Sabbath at a point of increasing confidence, but they're not yet guaranteed headliners. They've had some success in releasing recordings, but they're still kind of making their name. The band, of course, as I detailed in some other reviews, had its fair share of trials and tribulations on the way to getting signed. These challenges, of course, included Ozzy's past tendency to go to jail on occasion, but maybe more significantly, the industrial accident which cost Tony Iommi the tips of two of his fretting fingers. Their debut came out in early 1970. It went to number 8 in the UK and number 23 in the US, where it stayed in their charts for a full year. At the time, they got terrible reviews from the rock critic establishment, an establishment that really wanted to see a lot more Dylan and Beatles in the band and things like that, sort of cerebral roots rock. But if the critics weren't ready to embrace Sabbath, the kids were. And following the success of their debut album in terms of sales, Paranoid, their second album, released in the fall of 1970, was an even bigger smash. The period of touring to support Paranoid is one of the busiest times in Sabbath's history. Between the fall of 1970 and the spring of 1971, they played somewhere in the region of 110 dates, about a gig every other day. And during this time, they did 3 separate legs of the tour in the UK, 3 separate legs in Europe. They took a trip down to Australia at the end of January 1971 to play the Maiponga Pop Festival just outside Adelaide. And in the 6-month period, they also did their first 2 tours of the US, covering both coasts. In and amongst all this gigging, the band were, however, paradoxically able to find for the first time a couple of nice chunks of time to be able to be in the recording studio and spend the time over making an album. Their previous records had been pulled together pretty much on the fly. But here, either side of their second US tour in February and March 1971, they were able to take a total of about 20 days to make this record. It's recorded at Island Studios in London, and as with the first 2 records, the producer here is Roger Bain. This, however, is Bain's last collaboration with Sabbath. After this point, they began to feel more confident and began to do their own production. You can also kind of argue that that's a bit of the beginning of the end for Sabbath, because increasingly, although there are some great high points in the next 3 albums, which are excellent records, there is a lack of discipline and a degree of self-indulgence and, frankly, a lot of substance abuse as well. Here, however, there are none of those problems, and to the degree that there is experimentation, it just works. Famously, of course, this is the album where Tony detunes his guitar 1.5 steps and Geezer follows suit with his bass. The net effect, of course, perhaps obviously, is to make this a deeper, heavier sounding record than really any rock record made before. To give a flavor of this, I dusted off my SG. Here's the riff to Sweet Leaf in standard tuning. And here it is down-tuned to match the record. Product of necessity perhaps, but there's just something satisfying about that. And the record-buying public clearly was expecting to be satisfied as well, because this record went gold on pre-orders alone in the United States. Side 1 starts with that classic moment of Sabbath on record, which is the very beginning to Sweet Leaf, which of course is the tape loop of Tony Iommi coughing. He's coughing, of course, because Ozzy had brought in a big fat joint into the studio, given it to Tony. Tony had taken a big toke and began to cough uncontrollably. The tape was running. Roger Bain thought that sounds good, turned it into a loop, and now, of course, it's this classic part of the Sabbath oeuvre. It may not be the heaviest riff of all time or the best heavy riff of all time, but if you're going to have that kind of a conversation, there's no way you can have that discussion without talking about this song. That's followed by After Forever, which is surprising in a couple of different ways as a song. First of all, it's surprising because it is such a sleeper of a tune. There are very few heavy metal riffs and heavy metal songs that actually kick this much ass. But of course, the other reason why this song is a bit surprising probably has to do with why it's not that well known, is that the subject matter is not very heavy metal. This is a full-on Christian rock song. And not only is it a Christian rock song, it's kind of a naive kind of almost immature Christian rock song. It is basically Pascal's Wager set to rock lyrics. Only if Pascal were kind of not particularly sophisticated 15-year-old, this could have done with a redraft lyrically. But overall, this is a tune which just gives and gives and gives with repeated listening, and it's an absolute steamroller. The last full song on this album side is Children of the Grave, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's preceded by another song, which is really a short intro of less than a minute, called Embryo. And this is maybe an appropriate time to talk about the short instrumental pieces which dot Sabbath records here and there. There was a bit of a vogue in the 70s to have otherwise heavy or quite rocking records intercut with little sort of virtuoso instrumental guitar pieces. And Tony Iommi is a guitarist that I absolutely worship, but this is kind of his limitations on display, because the very things which made Tony a great composer and a great guitarist, in particular his ability to craft hypnotic riffs that just get the whole band and a whole stadium sort of moving and grooving and headbanging and so on, that kind of focus on repetition and simplicity doesn't work so well in light, supposedly virtuoso instrumental pieces. You could say, I think, the same about Laguna Sunrise or Fluff, these other pieces and other records. Anyway, I've actually come to love this piece because it's the intro to one of my favorite songs in this record and in their whole catalog, Children of the Grave. But again, not necessarily high art, and I actually would make the case that a lot of Sabbath is high art. And it leads, of course, into Children of the Grave, which is an incredible song. Ozzy has said, well, at the time anyway, that it was the most ass-kicking song they'd ever recorded. It's hard to think of what Motorhead achieved or what was achieved by the other bands of the new wave of British heavy metal without reference to this song in particular. And if you haven't seen the YouTube clip of them performing this song at the California Jam in 1974, seek it out. Side 2 starts with Orchid, to which all of my previous comments about Embryo apply, and then that leads into Lord of this World, which has a staggeringly heavy, slow riff. In fact, it's so slow you're amazed that they dare actually to play as slowly as they do, but it works so very well. And the bridge, which is the only place where the title of the song actually comes into it, is delivered by Ozzy with such ferocity and emotion. I often feel that with Sabbath, in the hands of a lot of other bands, the musical content, the lyrical content wouldn't work. It would seem like a bit of a parody. It would seem trite. The magic of why all this works, I think, comes down to Ozzy. He doesn't approach these lyrics with a wink or a sort of sly grin. He absolutely dons the emotions and the ideas that Geezer has written down, and he delivers it straight. And he's completely convincing. He takes you along with him. You believe him. It is an easy ride just to go along with Ozzy on this. And this is why I think when they eventually replaced Ozzy at one point with Ian Gillan, it didn't work, because Ian Gillan is all about that sly wink and not about playing these kinds of lyrics straight. The second last song on the album is Solitude, which is the only sort of outright ballad in the song. The other 5 full songs are all quite heavy rockers. This is a sad song. It's really quite a beautiful song too. And there's no greater shock to the system as this song fades out. You're turning up the volume to hear the little sort of tinkling of glass or sound effects which occur at the very end. And then Tony slides down his E string with the beginning of the riff to Into the Void, which again is one of the contenders for the heaviest, most ass-kicking riff in the history of heavy metal. And a classic example of less is more, because here's this amazing riff, but he gives it to us for maybe 20% of the song, kind of like Hole in the Sky a few albums later. This song, of course, like so many Sabbath songs, is completely laden with riffs. There are probably 4 different riffs on this song, which any other band could have taken and formed the whole song around. And that, of course, is the magic of Sabbath at this particular point in time. They had riffs to burn that other bands could only dream of. They had the confidence to play slow and heavy and to carve out that niche which so many listeners were finding satisfying. And they had the self-belief of a group of musicians who were exploring this terrain for the first time. So what to say about Master of Reality? Well, if you consult the internet, you'll find that most observers consider Paranoid to be their best record. And there's a lot to say for Paranoid. Paranoid has got probably the best single individual songs of any Sabbath record. But taken as a whole, there's a lot to be said for this album as well. There are no weak moments, there are tons of dynamics, despite the fact that this could be the heaviest album that anyone has ever recorded. And for me, if this album didn't exist, it would have to be created because the world just needs this much heaviness. And clearly it's a 5 out of 5.